Greetings, my fellow Americans, and welcome to another episode of the Great Montana Conspiracy podcast. Tonight's episode is going to be on something that's a little bit more closer to home in Kalispell. Although I'm going to cover some national topics, I'm going to definitely talk about something that really affects and hits home that I've witnessed on the streets here. And it really is a big issue, and it starts with the subject of confidential informants. So tonight's particular topic is titled The Promotion of Crime by Government, specifically where the police will encourage criminal misconduct in order to gain confidential informants, in order to get information on other people who have committed crimes, so that the bulk of prosecutions outweigh the actual offenses. And it just works out to where it's a terrible system, and I'll explain as we go on. Basically, the use of a confidential informant, or sometimes called a CI, in general is a good idea. The idea is you find somebody who's inside a criminal network, you tap him, you manipulate him, you nudge him a little bit to get what you want out of him, and he spills the beans. He tells you something that's going on, he gives you information on something you want. Yeah, it's just basically that's it. It's a great idea. Turn someone on the inside in order to get information on someone higher up in the organization. For instance, you have a bookkeeper and you want to nail the head of the mafia. You go to the bookkeeper and you say, hey, we know your son has a DUI offense. We can lessen that offense. It's his third strike. He's going to go to prison unless we talk favorably to the judge for him. So we're going to give you a little bit of incentive there to cooperate with us and give us information. You go have a conversation with your boss. You get something on recording. You then come back to us with a recording. We use it. If it's usable, hey, your son's off. Standard confidential informant. Sounds like a really good idea, right? The problem is that CIs are used a lot more base than that. You hear of all these big CIs that are part of, name people higher up in the chain, but that's usually not what happens, at least not as I've witnessed here in Kalispell, Montana. Criminal A CI's information can be used to obtain warrants, to locate criminals, to basically find out that criminal conduct is existing in the first place that law enforcement may not otherwise know about. Most often, though, a CI is not corroborated. They act on the information alone. They don't go in and try to find some other information to back up or verify it. So a lot of times these officers go in half cocked. They go off of information they want to believe, and because they want to believe it, they act on it. And it leads to a lot of misinformation and errors and mistakes. Unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that pretty much police can use CIs however they want to without much limitation. There's three 1966 cases that actually came out of the U.S. Supreme Court. Hoffey versus United States, where basically the court said it doesn't violate civil rights to protect against confronting a CI or conferring to a CI. So if you're providing information to a confidential informant, it doesn't violate your civil rights. Your civil rights are not being violated by that confidential informant being used against you, even though that confidential informant's contact with you may have been misleading, misdirecting, or directly for the purpose of incriminating you. So Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination don't work. Another case is Lewis versus United States, which basically says that undercover officers can lie about their identities, and it doesn't affect whether or not their testimony is reliable. And then you have Osborne versus United States, which allows the permission of recordings by CIs to be used in court. So basically, the Supreme Court has come down and said the police are free to use confidential informants are necessary for the proper function of law enforcement and to act as undercover investigations. And as I mentioned, when they're used properly, as with so many things in my podcast, I start off by saying when they're used properly, as they're intended to be used, they're great tools. They're great resources. A confidential informant inside an existing criminal empire can be a massive boon to law enforcement. Someone who comes forward and says, hey, you may not be aware there was a bomb threat. They're planning to put a bomb in the post office. And I'll walk in and I'll wear a wire so you can get these guys on it. Hey, it's a boon. Law enforcement didn't even notice what's going on. But what happens when you have the officers, all they want are the numbers of arrests, they want quantity over quality. They don't really care about whether the person is actually a real criminal, or are they just someone they can make look like a criminal for the purposes of doctoring their books and putting more people in prison? I talked a lot in the last episode about the prison for profit system, how the government has leaned much more towards the idea, in Montana at least, towards finding people to fill beds rather than actually worrying about prosecuting and pursuing actual criminals. In this instance, the problem comes in when these confidential informants are given blanket immunity to continue to commit crimes once they've latched themselves onto an officer. Personally, I've known dozens. I've known dozens of individuals who have gotten these kinds of deals. I've had people who might come in my apartment, sit down, because they know my apartment's a safe place, and make phone calls to their contact on the inside and relay information to them so they aren't overheard by their people on the street. These are people who are going out and continue to commit crimes. They're continuing to commit burglaries. They're continuing to sell drugs, assaults in many cases. I know one instance where where someone was arrested with drugs in her pocket. Possession, flagrantly possession. We're talking, meth, several pouches of meth, little baggies. I don't know what their weights were. I don't know that kind of stuff very well. She was out of jail in 2 days. No record, no prosecution, no nothing. Why? Because she's an informant. And they want their informants on the street. They don't care if those informants are breaking laws. And what happens is this isn't just one or two. If I know dozens, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of informants out there who are informing on anybody and everybody. And the problem is, most of the time, they're informing on people who aren't actually really criminals. Their officer wants a body, 3 bodies, 10 bodies, so they come up with a list of names of people they can set up and get them to, they'll give information to them, to the officers, or they'll do what are called controlled buys, where the CI will walk in with a recording device or with the officer present as an undercover, do a controlled buy where they walk them through the purchase of the illicit material and walk away. And they come back and they prosecute them later for this offense. I know somebody who this happened to, and she was not, she was, and in all fairness, there are certain people who lose themselves to the drug addictions. No argument there. But I'm not going to use her name because I don't want to divulge it. I don't want her family, because she has since passed away, and I don't want to bring up grief or anything to the family. But she would keep herself zoned out on her meds. She lost her husband. A year and a half later, she was still using the drugs to dull the pain. That's all she did. She just took a pill, dozed out, was asleep, 16, 20 hours a day on the pills. Because she didn't want to be awake. She didn't want to deal with it. A guy comes over, a neighbor comes over. He knew she had drugs, probably seen her coming out of the house with her prescription bags. Took an officer over there for a controlled buy. Knocked on the door until she came out in the front room. Sat in the front room. He kept badgering her. Oh, can you sell me something? Can you sell something? She said, I don't have anything. I'm not selling anything. I just want to go back to bed. Let me go back to bed. And I've actually heard this recording. So this isn't her just saying this. She kept saying over and over again on the recording, I just want to go back to bed. Just go. I'll talk to you later. But I need to go to sleep. I want to go back to sleep. And he just kept, well, what about this? Can I buy this for that? Can I buy this for that? Finally, she says, fine. She goes into her room. She pulls out her pill bottle, puts a couple hands him a couple pills. Said, just go. I want to go back to bed. And then she walked back to her bedroom. He put money on the table to complete the buy, which she didn't even know he left. And then they left. And she went back to bed. Next thing you know, she gets served the warrant for making an illicit sale. The officer knew she wasn't a seller. He knew this guy badgered her for it. He badgered her until he wore her down, and she gave him 2 pills. Didn't sell him. Didn't agree on a price. Gave him 2 pills. Just to get him to leave her alone. These are the kind of things that these CIs do, is they basically set up people to take falls. It's about numbers, not about actual crimes. And remember, this guy who's doing this informant bit, he more than likely has a huge history. In fact, I've seen some of his history because I've helped her with her reviewing her criminal case. I've seen some of his history, some of the things he's done, the actual prosecutions he has, his actual criminal history should have immediately disqualified him as a CI. Except that's what they want. They want the actual criminals to be the ones who are actually being out there being their CIs. They don't want the small time people out there who aren't doing anything. They want the people who are actively doing things, and they want to keep those people actively in the community doing this. These are called incentivized informants. Much like what I talked about last week with the incentivized informant from the inside snitch inside the jail. These are people who are out in the community, and they're incentivized because they're basically said, okay, if you agree to give us X bodies within Y period of time, we won't arrest you. You can do whatever you want, commit whatever crimes you want, go ahead, you do it. Just give us names. You keep giving us names, you keep giving us people we can prosecute in your stead, we'll let you continue to commit crime. This is horrific. Anybody can be set up for a crime. Anybody can be set up for a crime. I'm living proof that anybody can be set up for a crime. So when you have confidential informants that are out there that are running around looking for bodies to turn over to law enforcement doesn't care whether these people are actually guilty or not guilty, just so long as they have people to throw in jail, you have a very serious problem. Rarely are CIs made available for cross-examination in Kalispell. Usually the circumstances where they do come up, the police argue that the CI's identity is more important because he remains embedded in the criminal activity in the community, and therefore they argue they shouldn't have to disclose it. Works sometimes, doesn't work other times. But a lot of times, the actual existence of a criminal informant is not even disclosed. Look at the situation where I was talking about a couple of times ago. There was about how the informant's information wasn't disclosed to the jury, or the incentive to the informant was not disclosed to the jury. In fact, he got on the stand and claimed there was no incentive. And clearly there was incentive. He was getting paid thousands of dollars, literally thousands of dollars, to keep up his perpetual story, all because, they didn't want to disclose that to the jury. So not only is the CI's identity sometimes not even revealed because they argue against revealing it, which, and let's face it, with the amount of plea bargains being offered out there, very rarely does the CI actually make it to court. People take plea bargains to get out because they get scared, they get terrified, they get told they're going to have a worse punishment if they go to trial than if they actually take a plea bargain. So the CI ends up remaining out there. Name never gets mentioned in the court documents. Identity never gets disclosed to the community, and he continue to be the criminal and continue to be the criminal he always has been. In many instances, though, especially in instances where the police think they can get by with just alleging that a CI existed, they make them up. And that's the story I'm going to go in tonight, where the idea that a confidential informant's identity is more important than a person's constitutional right to cross-examination or confrontation of his accusers actually gives police the ability to fabricate the existence of a CI. Now, I'm going to be talking about a no-knock warrant, and I want to distinguish a case that was in recent news, and that's of Breonna Taylor. Sadly, we all know, probably, the story of Breonna Taylor, how on March 13th, 2020, officers did a no-knock warrant on her residence and ended up shooting her dead. Her boyfriend was a witness to it. He said the police didn't identify themselves, they just came barging in, and consequence, Breonna died. But this was not a CI-inspired warrant. They were looking for somebody who had at one time dated Breonna, who they believed might still be at that address, and that drugs were being stored at the address. And it was bad information, but nevertheless, it did include a no-knock warrant. But I want to distinguish that case because what I'm going to go into next also deals with no-knock warrants. But in this case, the no-knock warrant is inspired by a alleged criminal, acting as a confidential informant when no such confidential informant actually existed. I want to bring your attention to the case of Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas. On January 28, 2019, in Pecan Park, Texas, police were issued a no-knock warrant on an alleged CI tip. When the police burst in, Dennis fired on them, what he thought were armed intruders, because they apparently didn't identify themselves. Or if they did not do so in a way that he recognized, because as soon as somebody barged in, he started firing. Regina herself tried to wrestle a shotgun away from one of the officers who was invading her home. Thinking this is an armed intrusion, they're defending their home. The officers responded by killing them. They shot them dead. Turns out, after this all settled down, the court doc said there was no actual CI. The police alleged when they got the warrant that there was a CI who had witnessed a controlled heroin buy, and that this couple were rolling a large heroin trafficking through their home. None of it was true. The only actual evidence that even included the police that something was going on in this house apparently was a phone call from Regina's mom, who called in the police department and said she was concerned her daughter was on drugs. Based on that, an officer took it upon himself to say, oh, maybe this is a drug house. Alleged the heroin existence. Alleged the controlled buy at the property. No CI's identity was ever disclosed because no CI ever existed. When they raided the house, they found a little bit of marijuana and a little bit of cocaine. Definitely not dealer quantities, personal quantities. Definitely no heroin, which was supposedly what they were looking for, was heroin. There was no heroin at all. There certainly wasn't a drug lab. There was no scales, no bags, no nothing. The alleged operation they claim existed, that the CI supposedly witnessed, did not exist because they made it up. No such buy happened. No heroin, no drug lab. Just small amounts of marijuana and cocaine. And for this, these people lost their lives because the police are given unilateral authority to use confidential informants without consequence. They don't have to disclose the identity of the confidential informant to the judge. They don't have to disclose the identity in any part of the preliminary investigation. If it comes down to court, they can even motion to suppress the identity of the confidential informant, so they can keep using the same confidential informant. So, and I wish to say this. I wish I could say this was the only time this has ever happened. That's why I was researching this story. I came across dozens. Just skipping over and trying to find key ones. I'm not going to waste your time by going over. By all means, look it up. No-knock warrants. But there's one in particular I want to bring to attention just very briefly, and that's the story of Katherine Johnston, who was a 92-year-old grandma. 2006, Atlanta, Georgia. Police supposedly had a confidential informant claimed to have bought drugs from the house. They bust down her door. She has a little handheld gun. Thinks she's being the home invasion. Fires up one shot at the home invaders. They shoot her down with 39 bullets. No knock warrant, no announcement, no nothing. Now keep in mind, even if, hypothetically, an officer were to come to the door in the middle of the night and yell, "Police!" Bang. When you're first waking up out of sleep, if you're deeply asleep, you're not going to hear or understand the first few things that reach your mind. What's going to reach your mind is that there are people in your home, they have guns, and you're at risk of harm. You're going to get defensive. Anybody who says they wouldn't isn't being honest with themselves. You will either fight or you will flee. And if you cannot flee, you will be forced to fight. That's basic human psychology 101. These examples are of people who thought their homes were being invaded by criminals. They had no way to discern at the moment, in the heat of the battle, so to speak, that these were police officers. In the case of Breonna Taylor, they were civilian. They were plainclothes police officers. Same thing with Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas. All they had were vests. They were not clearly identified as police. They had no way of knowing. And they tried to defend themselves, and they were killed for it. You see on TV all this time, you see these people who go, they start shooting at the cops, and the cops get pinned down. They start shouting across the way, "We're police, stand down, stand down." And that doesn't happen. Obviously, if that were happening, we wouldn't be having these situations. Or the police are just completely oblivious and disregarding any common sense. One way or the other, people are dying. And people are dying because police rely on confidential informants and they have no oversight or accountability for it. And the problem is, and now we're going to go to Kalispell now, Kalispell being in Montana. The problem here is that, as I said, I've personally known dozens of CIs. I've known them, I've talked to them, worked around them, helped, if they need rides, if they need food and shelter, if they need something, I'm always trying to help people in the community. And that includes people who are addicts and people who may have a less than savory lifestyle. I don't judge people for who they are, what they do. I try to help where I can help. One of my axioms in life is, with ability comes responsibility, so long as you don't hurt yourself in the process. If I have the ability to help somebody, I'm going to help them. That's what I do. I'm not going to judge them for whether they use drugs, whether they're alcoholics, whether they're homeless. I'm not going to sit there and give them a 20-point essay question on what crimes they might have committed in the last 6 months. I'm just going to offer help. But as a consequence, I circulate around people that fall into this area that police recruit for their CIs. These people will get picked up on a charge. They will agree to turn, and then let loose. They'll let loose to continue to do drugs, to shoplift, to burglar, steal cars. In one instance I'm aware of, some guy actually picked up a car, stole it, took it down to a neighboring county. We're in Flathead County here, Lake County to the south. I guess the plan was to chop the car up, sell it for parts, but got picked up, brought back here, got released in 2 days. We're talking grand theft here, people. Like, oh, because he was a CI and they wanted him on the streets. If they get arrested, they're released promptly, within a day or two. No charges are ever filed. Police will say they want their CIs on the street. They'll say that if their CIs are locked up, they do them no good. The problem is these CIs are not bringing in actual criminals in most cases. These CIs are bringing in small potatoes, little bits, just enough to fill the rosters. Remember how I said in my last video how it's become a numbers game. It's about how many people they can put in the beds in the jail, so they can find out how much they can actually turn around and make money. It's not about finding actual criminals. If they were actually concerned about these criminals, they'd be worrying about these confidential informants. They wouldn't be letting the confidential informants go back on the street and continue to commit crimes. New crimes. Not the old crimes which they were picked up for. New crimes. Ongoing and ongoing and ongoing. It's a perpetual license to be a criminal. And it encourages it just builds up the massive amount of crime that already exists, and they're not tapping it. They're going out and charging people in a lot of cases that don't actually commit crimes at all. Or if they do, they're so minuscule that they don't matter. People that matter are the people that are the confidential informants. These people are out there operating. They can't give out the really high-ranking people's names because then they would not be able to get their product. Most of these people out there who are the confidential informants I know are drug addicts or alcoholics. People who just are living on the street. They have nothing else to go on, and so they will continue to commit crimes continue to get arrested, continue to be let go, so they continue to find people to turn over to the police. Kind of sounds like Nazi Germany a little bit, don't you think? About the collaborators who helped them find the Jews, who helped them find where they're hiding so they could come get them, pick them off the street. Well, in this case, these people aren't really Jews. They're just, or even really criminals in most cases. There's people the confidential informants can say they are. The problem is when you give a carte blanche authority to a criminal, the criminal is not going to ebb off their criminal behavior. The criminal is going to increase their criminal behavior. Whereas before they might have been guarded and worried about getting caught, now they have no such concern. There's no restriction, there's no restraint. They can do whatever they want and continue to be criminals. And continue to be better criminals because guess what? Now they have the protection of the police. A confidential informant that provides information is one thing. A confidential informant that continues to conduct criminal behavior, continues to do wrong, continues to perpetuate the criminal problem, that's a matter entirely. Personally, I know the location of 3 drug houses here in town. 3. Okay? Here, there, 3. I know 3 drug houses. And you can find the drug houses in Kalispell. It's real easy. Follow a cop car. I joke you not. They go and do runs around the houses. They patrol the houses. I've actually seen people in the front yard of these houses wave to the cops, and the cops wave back. I've asked police officers, if you know where the drug house is, why don't you bust it? I've gotten a couple different answers. The most common answer I get is, well, we need to know where everybody is. So if there's a warrant, we can serve them. Yeah, okay, sure. The other one is they say that if they bust the house, then another one's going to open, they won't know where it is. So it's better they know where the house is than shut the house down. Hey, I know where there's an Assassin's Guild. We're not going to bust the Assassin's Guild because, if we bust them, then they're just going to find another place to hide and we won't know where they are. Are you serious? Are you honestly serious? You know where the bank robbers are, but you're not going to bust them because if you bust them, then we're not going to know where the next group of bank robbers go. It's an insane prospect. But the truth is far more chilling. And it's chilling because the real truth is these officers are getting kickbacks. These officers are getting benefits. When we had a prostitution ring run through town here a few years ago, they were getting prostitutes. They'll get a dime bag, they'll get this, they'll get that. They claim they're getting these for their informants. They claim they're getting these for the... I have every reason to believe they're getting it for themselves. There's a story I always tell people up in Columbia Falls, which is a neighboring community. There was a guy who lived across the street from one of the drug houses in Columbia Falls. And they would sit on the front lawn and make drug sales right there in the open. And this guy had 2 kids in his house. And he would call the police. The police would take the report. The police would drive by, do nothing. Literally nothing. They would never stop. They never do anything. They just drove around. So after a while, he got tired of trying to call in for the police. He saw a drug sale going down in the front yard, took his baseball bat, went across the street, threatened to beat the guy's head, and if he continued to sell drugs in front of his house where his kids could see. Now, keep in mind, I'm not in any way condoning the use of the baseball bat. That probably was a bit above and beyond, but desperate times, desperation, he was trying to protect his family. The police were called. Surprise, surprise, even though the drugs were according to what I've been told by the gentleman directly, the drugs were plainly visible, but he was the only one arrested because the Columbia Falls Police Department was running protection for the house, which same thing happens here in Kalispell. And most of these houses are run, or people going through these houses are the criminal informants. They are the people who they're working with. Like I said, there's a huge network here. I just barely touch on the network and the people I associate with and I help. I barely touch on the network, but it's much broader than the people I met. There are so many more people out there doing this exact same thing. And these are the people out there continuing to commit crimes with impunity without any real backlash, because the police want them on the streets. The police want them out there because those people, that one person they have out there, will give them 5 people. And they care more about those 5 people than they care about that one person. Even if that one person is the one actually committing the crimes, and the 5 people are just people they can throw in jail and say they committed crimes. The truth is, it's a racket. I mean, when you get kickbacks and you're running protection for the drug houses, and you throw people in, you use the existing criminals to create guppies. Guppies are basically little small fish in the sea who are probably not even guilty in the first place, just set up to create the illusion they're guilty so they can be run through the system, so they can get the federal kickback money, because, hey, we've got somebody in jail, need money. Doesn't matter and remember back on my earliest videos, I talk about how these people are put in jail under impossible bonds, and they're being told they have to defend their liberty and their freedom all under these impossible bonds, all in jail. They aren't earning income anymore. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their resources, probably lose their apartments, their homes, their families, all on what could potentially be false allegations. The sheriff's website clearly states that the majority of people in the jail are in pre-trial detention. Pre-trial, which means they have not been convicted. And this is how they get them. One of the many ways they get them. When police use a confidential informant network to farm other criminals, or to farm the creation of other criminals, rather than prosecuting the actual criminals themselves, it becomes an inherent problem. I'm sure a lot of people watching this are familiar with the show Blacklist, where Red Reddington runs around the world as this massive criminal mastermind, and he's cooperating with the FBI and bringing other criminals to justice, but while at the same time going out and committing massive criminal misconduct himself. That's all a fictional story. None of that is real. And it's far more grandiose than what's going on here in Kalispell, but it's the same principle. Only now imagine 100 Reddingtons, 1,000 Reddingtons right in the street of Kalispell, all continue to operate their own little enterprises, however small they may be, continuing their burglaries, continuing their drug sales, drug transactions, or drug runs, continuing their willful destruction of property, assault and batteries, whatever, continuing to be criminals. Also, they can throw names to the police department so they can have quantity over quality. Let's get 5 people in jail who are less guilty than the one person who is far guiltier and done 10 times more. Can I ask why? When does it become more important to protect society than to perpetuate the illusion of protection? Because that's what it is. It's an illusion of protection. This is all about the government permitting and allowing crime. They're promoting it, they're paying them, they're rewarding them for being criminals. Meanwhile, they're filling their jails with lesser criminals, people who are genuinely no real offenses, all so they can sit there and get money for the people who are actually in the beds. And they put them under impossibly high bails so they can't get out until they take plea deals just to get out. It's a broken system, ladies and gentlemen. And it's part of the building blocks of the Great Montana Conspiracy. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you find it informative, please help support us. Our information is in the text attached to this video. If for some reason it's not, please visit us on YouTube. You can find us under the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast. Like and subscribe. Or if you prefer, you can go to monspiracy.podbean.com, which is where this podcast originates. As always, if you're hearing this, please be safe, and whenever possible, please be free. Thank you.